and welcome everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of the IT India Digital Conversations. I hope all of you are doing well and keeping safe. Today's session is about accelerating innovation in energy storage and the EV ecosystem and has been curated by the Energy Working Group of the IT Future Tech Panel. I am Suman Bhaumik, your weekly host, and I lead the events development for the IET in India. Joining us from Pune is Dr. Rahul Valavalkar. He is the President and Managing Director of Customized Energy Solutions India. Our moderator for the session joins us from Bengaluru, Anil Kadam. He is the Chair of the Energy Working Group of the IIT's Future Tech Panel. Currently, he is working as General Manager, Head of Smart Energy Systems and Smart City Systems in Schneider Electric. I'll pass this over to you now, Anil.
So, Dr. Rahul, today's subject very precisely on storage and the storage requirement in grid as well as in the EV part. Now, let me set a little bit of context. India is standing on a 372 gigawatt of installed capacity. And in that, close to around 78 gigawatt is renewable. In last 5 years, we have seen 225% increase in renewable. That means it's very fast. It's very, very fast. And there's a lot of policies around renewable, targeted towards going green, reducing the impact on environmental and being sustainable, and connected to Paris Agreement as well. So with 78 gigawatt, close to 35 in solar and 38 in wind, India wants to do 175 gigawatt of renewable by 2022. That means it's a huge share of whatever it is today. It is going to be a huge share in the whole installed capacity. So that's the impetus. So why storage, we will talk. Okay. And then today we are still in the IC engine era, but a lot of emotions and a lot of positive emotions on EV, flipping the demographics of mobility. So we would also want to understand what's the storage significance in EV. Let's get to the grid part first. What are the different storage options, what has been evaluated globally in India for grid, and what is the most sustaining type? So let's discuss on the type and then go to the technology itself.
Okay. So that's actually a very important question, because a lot of time nowadays when people talk about storage, we assume that we are talking just about batteries. But the way as the India Energy Storage Alliance we look at storage is, it is a any form of storage technology where you are converting energy from one form to another form and then convert it back into the original form. So you can start with, in fact, the biggest energy storage technology right now in the world is pumped hydro. This has been around for hundreds of years, and there is more than 100 gigawatt of pumped hydro facilities which are operating around the world. It's just that most of these pumped hydro facilities were built in before 1970s or 80s, where there was a lot of awareness about the environmental impact of pumped hydro. Because if you have a right site where you can easily create upper reservoir, lower reservoir, then pumped hydro is a great technology. And even right now, there is a lot of innovation happening in terms of the improved motors, variable speed drives, which is making these pumped hydro facilities more flexible and more versatile for the grid. So if you have such a site and you have the environmental clearances, then pumped hydro is still a very good technology. And even in India, there are some new projects which are coming up. So this is a good technology. The other form of storage technology which is very prevalent around the world is thermal storage, where particularly for industrial applications, you can just convert energy into heat and then use it for reducing any fossil fuel consumption, and thus you can use it. It can be also used for air conditioning, so the heat can be stored in form of either cold or either heat, and it can be used accordingly either for cooling applications or heating applications. When it comes to then other form of technology is mechanical technologies, where you have technologies like compressed air energy storage, which are slightly sort of an improvised way of running a simple gas turbine, where you combine it with a underground compressed air storage and convert that into sort of a combined cycle air loop rather than having with steam loop, and try to separate out, instead of just burning fuel in a gas turbine completely for all the compression as well as the actual electricity generation. You use electrical energy whenever you have excess energy available, run it on electrical compressors, store that air in underground caverns, and then release it, pass it through an expander and use it. So this is a technology which companies like Siemens have a significant intellectual property, but because of number of sort of geological as well as some of the technological issues, there are only limited technologies in which are projects which have reached the commercialization stage right now. There is a lot of innovation happening in terms of adiabatic or isothermal compressed air energy storage, or even like liquefied air energy storage. So there are many companies who are still working on that. Then another form of technology is gravity-based storage, where people are saying that okay, pumped hydro has been around for a long time, but typically pumped hydro projects are at gigawatt scale, and you are looking at 10 or 15 or 26-hour kind of a storage. Can you make this gravity-based storage using the same principles more modular? So using like different concepts of cranes and pulleys and try to use it. And there are at least around 5 or 6 companies who are trying to commercialize this technology, where you don't no longer need certain geographical limitations, but you can actually build such projects anywhere in the world, even in cities and those things. So these are again in early stage of commercialization. And last but not the least is obviously electrochemical storage, where lead acid batteries have been around for more than 150 years. There are other form of batteries like nickel cadmium, nickel metal halide batteries have been around. So there are probably around 20 different electrochemistries of batteries which are around. Within lithium-ion batteries, which is currently quite popular, there are around 8 different forms of lithium-ion batteries. And then there are also other forms of sodium-based batteries, zinc-based batteries. There are a number of different type of batteries, even metal layer batteries. A lot of innovation is taking place in this space. Now, in terms of your question of what is most sustainable, lot of times this question depends on where you draw the boundary, right? Sometimes people pick up one part of the picture and then say, no, this is not sustainable or this is sustainable. So people would say that, oh, electrochemical batteries have certain chemicals, and then if you dump it, then that could create a nightmare. So it is not sustainable technology. But on the other hand side, lead acid industry has a track record of having more than 95% recyclability. It is one of the most recycled technology because there is a value in it. Same thing is now happening with lithium ion batteries, where there is a lot of work happening to try to make sure that you recover almost all the materials from lithium ion batteries, because the beauty with most of the electrochemical batteries is material does not decompose during the process. So you can keep on actually recycling it endlessly, and you can reduce, you can really go for a circular economy if you just take some discipline in terms of making sure that the entire systems are designed in a more flexible way, and then they can be disassembled and sent to recycling. So there are a number of new forms where people are looking for organic materials and other things. So sustainability, I think, can be addressed in a multiple ways, and we think that if you pay the right attention, then most of these technologies can actually be scaled up in a sustainable way.
Oh, thanks. Quite elaborate, and we know now all the types. Now, coming to the most feasible one, the electrochemical one. What is the charging time and the discharging times, and is the present technology capable of providing the access or the speed for grid?
Sure. So that's a very important question. So traditionally, the lead acid batteries, which are right now the dominant technology in India, they are typically preferred where you are charging them over 6 to 10 hours kind of a time. So they can be discharged relatively fast, but if you are doing very fast discharge, then you cannot extract entire amount of energy out of it. So if you are looking at a UPS application, then typically the batteries are sized which are significantly more than what amount of energy you need to be discharged in say 5 minute period of power outage till your diesel generator comes online. That is because during that 5 minutes you are only able to get out certain amount of energy out. If you move on to some of the batteries within lithium ion chemistry, again there are two types of batteries. You can have energy type of lithium ion batteries or power type of lithium ion batteries. So the energy type batteries are again typically designed for application of say 4 hours or longer. They can be charged discharged easily for anything for as long as you are charging or discharging for 1 hour or more. They can be considered as an energy battery. And then there are batteries which are specifically designed which are for power applications, which are for like 30-minute or less. And there again, there are certain forms of chemistries, like for example, lithium titanate chemistry. They can even be designed for possibly even a 5-minute full charge discharge. There are so that would be around 12 C rate, whereas there are a number of chemistries now where they can be easily sized for somewhere between 3 to 6 C rate. So that means it would be 10-minute to 30-minute kind of a charge discharge cycle. So that actually helps you in reducing the size of the batteries, and particularly if you find applications like say grid balancing or frequency regulation, then over last 10 years, number of successful commercial projects have been deployed by using 30 to 40-minute sized batteries and using them for a lot of frequent cycling.
Clear. So another question: among all these types of storage for grid, which is the most efficient one according to you?
So again, it would be dependent on application, but in general, lithium-ion batteries have at a cell level the highest efficiency. Typically, if you think about a lead-acid battery, then you would think of an efficiency of somewhere between 70 to 80%. If you are looking at certain metal air batteries, then their efficiency is typically around 60 to 75%. Flow batteries also have an efficiency in the range of 60 to 75%. Lithium-ion batteries at a cell level can have an efficiency somewhere between 93% to 97%. At the same time, some of these electrochemical batteries, they need to be maintained at certain temperature. So particularly considering India is a tropical country and ambient temperature could be even 40-degree or higher, you need to consider some of the auxiliary loads and consumption. So when you consider all in, even lithium-ion batteries would have, depending on the location and application, a round-trip efficiency of somewhere between 70 to 85%. So there is a lot of work which is happening on trying to, it is not just entirely about at the cell level, but when you go from a cell to a battery pack, you can incorporate certain passive and active cooling techniques which can reduce some of the requirement for the air conditioning and others. So there is a lot of innovation and work happening in this area. And in fact, there are certain new forms of lithium-ion batteries with a different type of electrolytes or with a different materials, which can actually even sustain 40 or 45-degree without much degradation. So a lot of work is happening in this area.
Fantastic. So I understand that there is environmental regulation needed to improve the efficiency, of course, with the chemistry itself. Now, what is the play of digital and the control systems to improve the efficiency of battery and use it fully as needed for the grid?
Sure. So that's again an excellent question. I think it is not just about chemistry, because especially when it comes to some of the advanced batteries, there are a number of different control components which come in. So these can be divided into two sides. So one is a BMS, which is a battery management system, which actually measures like certain cell parameters like temperature, voltage, current at individual cell level, and make sure that the cells are being operated within the safe range and you are not doing something which will damage the health of the cells or let it catch fire or have some safety incidents. And then there are energy management systems which can manage the energy flows between different battery packs, or it can make sure that the application related requirements are properly taken into account while maintaining the life of the batteries as well, because this is something which is very critical. And then there is a one more layer of intelligent systems which are coming in, where companies like us, Customized Energy Solutions, we come into the picture, where there are certain basic applications which now number of companies who are operating into, say, who are traditional providers of SCADA systems or other EMS systems are providing that. But then one more layer on top of that is how do you optimize revenue from this system, where you also need to understand the grid very well. You need to understand how the grid operates so that you can find a balance between managing the life of the batteries and getting the maximum return for your investment from it. So there are three layers of such control systems which are there.
Fantastic. Okay. So it's the ecosystem which makes the battery applicable to different use cases within the grid. Very nice. Now let's come to the material of the battery itself. Its availability for manufacturing in India, and what you see India self-sufficient for Make in India concept for the storage, for the huge requirement what we are talking of. We are not talking of a small requirement.
Yes.
We are talking of 50% of installed capacity to be
Yes.
from renewable in another 5, 7 years or 8 years.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what way?
Yeah, this is a quite controversial question, and people do actually raise it quite often in a way to say actually that no, we should not consider manufacturing in India because India does not have maybe lithium or cobalt, and so why are we considering we should wait for another 10 year and find out some other new form of battery which is just made up from local materials. So here I would say that again, the people who are saying this, I don't want to dismiss their views completely, but just take an example globally, right? For most of these, ultimately, this is some form of a fuel or a fuel carriage which is there in terms of these electrochemical batteries. Now, like most of the oil in the world is not consumed in Middle East, right? It gets shipped around in Europe, in US, in Australia. The coal right now is coming from Australia and getting burnt in India or US. So all those things, I think there is a lot of significant amount of global trade which is based on transfer of this. And also just specifically if you come to the electrochemical batteries and manufacturing, now lot of these raw materials for these was initially being mined in either Latin America or Africa, or Australia is again a major destination for or major source for these raw materials. Now none of these regions have a domestic requirement where they would be a big consumer for that. So none of these regions or none of these countries have any major battery manufacturing. Entire battery manufacturing is right now dominated by China. But if you see next 5 years, the major hubs will be apart from China. It is already Korea. Europe is coming in a very big way with more than 500 gigawatt hour of cell manufacturing. US is looking at scaling up from having just one Tesla gigafactory to having at least 10 other gigafactories in US. So all these regions not necessarily have the raw materials itself, but they are still going ahead because there is a almost 60% value addition which happens on top of, or even maybe 70% value additions which happens from just getting the raw materials to processing them, making it into the batteries and doing it. So there is a significant value addition happens. And the other part, in fact, I would say is that I'm not even sure India does not have these raw materials. It's just that we never look for them. So this is something which last 5 years we have been trying to work with government, and we are very happy that in last 2-3 years government has recognized this and started putting in efforts in removing some of the bottlenecks which were preventing this exploration in India. So just in last 1 year there are 2 mines which have discovered for lithium in India. Ultimately, lithium in sufficient quantity is available in seawater. So if you just start like it's like a lithium salt. If you go to Bolivia, it's a huge quantity of such salts are being created, and that is done. So it is ultimately depends a question of cost. Can you convert that raw material into a battery grade material at a reasonable cost? Like in US, in Nevada, there are significant mines which has lithium, but rather than using that locally mined lithium, they are still getting the material from Chile because it is cheaper. So, and those type of international trade, I think there is no need to try to go back from that. The other aspect is whatever gets manufactured or even imported in India, if we start doing recycling for that, that itself can become a significant part of the manufacturing ecosystem. So I think the raw material concerns are a little bit exaggerated, and maybe to some extent vested interests are trying to keep on bringing this up to try to distract us from getting into manufacturing. I'm at least based on all the research what we have done, we are convinced that it is not an issue and it can be managed. Whatever concerns are there, they can be managed if you plan this systematically.
Okay, very clear. So the raw material itself is a smaller part and a lot of value addition what an Indian manufacturing can do. Great. Now let's shift our focus from stationary batteries or stationary storage to mobility.
Yeah.
Biggest problem for even I almost ended up buying a electric scooter for my local commute.
Yes.
But the autonomy is a problem for me. You know,
Okay.
I can just do here confidently maybe 10, 15, 20 kilometers, but I'm not confident if I have to do a 50 mile because I have never tested it. I don't know.
Okay.
If I would do 150 or 200 mile, as you said, I need an electric vehicle fast charging infrastructure. And if I think of a four-wheeler or a bigger capacity or a bigger kilowatt, car, unless there is an infrastructure where I can quickly charge midway, I will never go for it. So, how is India picking on that? Is there a sensitivity of that particular topic, and is the Indian EV think tanks or EV, thought process going around that direction for infrastructure?
Sure. Uh, yeah, so you are absolutely right. I think there are traditionally this is called in the industry as a range anxiety, where people are worried that if you buy an electric vehicle, like right now, you know that anywhere you go within like a 10-kilometer radius, you will find at least one petrol or diesel pump, and you can just refuel anywhere in 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Whereas there is a concern that for electric vehicle charging, one is the charging is not available, and where it is available, you would need anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hour kind of a wait for charging your vehicle. So this is an area where there are multiple things which are happening, and as the technology is evolving, there are different solutions. It's not that there is just one solution for this. So one basic thing is yes, government is definitely looking at setting up more public charging infrastructures. There are agencies like ESL, Energy Efficient Services Limited, which is a partner for us and member for IESA, is working very aggressively in setting up such a infrastructure. There are many PSUs, including NTPC, Power Grid, Indian Oil, HPCL. All of them are exploring if they can use their existing infrastructure and add charging infrastructure. Many of the distribution utilities, including likes of Tata Power, BSES, and others, they are actually looking at this as a next revenue opportunity, because ultimately for utilities, they want to sell more electricity. So actually electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure is going to be possibly the savior for them. So all these utilities are looking at it. And then on the other hand side, even there are number of commercial establishments who internationally have realized that when you create such charging infrastructure, it is not about just making a business case on selling electricity from those charging stations. It is about like you have a shopping mall and you create a charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, and then people come in and they want to get free charging for 4 hours, and then they are spending 4 hours in a mall. You can actually make more money on them than what you can sell them the amount of electricity. So there are a number of such different business models are coming up, where like even not just shopping mall, but even like coffee shops or others. So there are people where actually these business models and partnerships are emerging, where they are happy that okay, if you want to get a free charging at say Starbucks, just as an example, I'm not specifically saying Starbucks, but any coffee shop, and you go and then sit there for half an hour or 1 hour, you end up ordering maybe coffee or sandwiches or others, which is going to cost you much more than the amount of electricity you are getting charged for. So a lot of these business models are coming up. On the other hand side, on the OEM side, people are now looking at actually sizing the batteries in a much more systematic way. Earlier, I think the problem in India and with the Indian OEMs was that somewhere there was this mindset that, oh, Indian customer will never buy a vehicle which is more than 10 lakh. So people were trying to size the battery looking at that price point rather than looking at what actually size is important for giving a comfort level to the customer. And this is the part where actually we have lost a huge opportunity, because we should not be right now worried about every individual customer and sizing a battery for every individual customer. There are customers who are driving more than 150 kilometers per day. For them, electric vehicles is right now economical. So if we had actually the car automakers who had this foresight, and if they had actually come up with a 250 or 300 kilometer driving range vehicle, they would have sold 10 times more, because everyone who was buying those vehicles would have actually saved more money. So we had number of these companies, including Blue Smart, E3 Taxi, Lithium Urban Fleet, where they have said that the only reason why they have not grown fast enough or faster than what they have grown so far is because in India, unfortunately, they just didn't have the vehicles available. So I think it is becoming a chicken and egg. But now I think that issue is getting solved because of the reduction in prices. I think most of the new models of electric cars coming, they have at least 200-kilometer driving range. Some of them even have 300, 350. So that eliminates the concern related to the range anxiety.
Great. Okay. So now let's get back to the grid itself. Ultimately, everything is going to get connected to the grid, be it electric vehicle or the storage for different services in the grid. Now, this grid was designed in the last 100 years, evolved for a one-way flow of electricity. So consumers were passive.
Yes.
Nobody was producing electricity. They were just paying the bill. So all of a sudden, you have a concept of prosumer.
Yes.
Producing. Okay, you have an electric vehicle, it is suddenly getting charged.
Yes.
You have bi-directional flow of electricity. So there's going to be a lot of dynamics and real-time management on the grid needed, isn't it? So how do you think this will be solved? distribution companies have to go one notch above in terms of the technical possibility on their network. What is your view on this?
So here, one thing I would say is that there are a lot of possibilities and opportunities with this coming up. Where actually, if companies are progressive, they can actually start introducing a lot of innovative services and actually build a complete new business ecosystem and new revenue stream around that. But considering the current financial issues for the discom as well as the traditional mindset, I'm not sure if most of the discoms would end up doing that. But at the same time, if the regulatory framework enables, and right now we have seen that where charging is now considered as a service, so you no longer need a license for setting up a charging infrastructure or providing charging, where actually there is a role for some of the aggregators can come in. In terms of some of the aspects related to the bi-directional other, when the grid rules permit it and when there are business models where you can actually do something what is called as vehicle to grid, where you actually consider that all these millions of vehicles which will be there with even like 100 kilowatt hour or 50 kilowatt hour battery pack in each vehicle, you would have gigawatt hour scale energy storage connected to the grid. And if you can then start tapping into it as a bi-directional resource, then that is great. But even before that, just by doing smart charging, by controlling the rate at which the vehicle is charged, or the rate at which or when the vehicle is charged, when it is not charged, and ensuring that there is a just a bi-directional communication, not necessarily bi-directional flow of electricity. Actually, you can these vehicles can actually be the savior for the distribution companies, because the way we are seeing right now, with more and more solar coming in, with more and more air conditioning getting added to the grid, there is actually the entire load shift, the traditional mindset of discoms, where they had the option to just shut down the feeder whenever the peak was going above something, and then like just let people get energy whenever they have available. The load shifts were much flatter, whereas we are going to see now much more dynamic load shifts, and that's where people need to see. The other part is even without storage, with more solar coming into the grid, some of the issues related to say tap changes on the transformer, the number of tap changes which were expected to happen in a lifetime, that may be happening now in just 1 year. So those type of things again people need to consider, and these are all these areas where actually a properly designed and controlled energy storage can be a savior for the distribution company, because energy storage systems along with the right power electronics and power conditioning system can do not only energy flows for active energy but also for reactive power. So that way you can actually solve number of these issues which are right now being faced by the consumers or by the utilities. Storage can be a perfect solution for both. But obviously, if you don't manage it, then it can also aggravate and create more problems. My former advisor, Dr. J. Apt at Carnegie Mellon University, used to say that when you add two random numbers, they don't always cancel out. So that's something which is very important. If you can add the controllability on these assets, then you have the ability to actually manage variability, manage your issues on the grid. If you let these just as a on an average tariff that okay anyone can come in and charge electric vehicle at any time for 4 rupees, then that could create actually a big headache and pain points for the discoms.
So the subject is storage, of course, to take advantage, but the subject is business model evolution.
Yes.
Subject future tech. Rightly, we are discussing in this panel. So all the future tech like IoT, AI, ML. How can we apply that here? And then, of course, the regulatory part. How well the regulatory is going to open up some, but needed. And definitely needed with the ambition what we are setting to ourselves, the speed with which we are going there. And now let's now come to so we spoke about manufacturers, we spoke about the end user, we spoke about the technical business model. How are we preparing the academia? See, the subject is chemistry, the subject is mechanical, there's a subject of electrical, and then there's a subject of control systems, which is IoT.
Yes.
Is there disciplines coming up together to bring all this together and think tanks ready to come and push this, to give support?
No, so this is a big challenge and opportunity. I think we have a lot of traditional educational lines which prepare students for one of these areas. But what is now important is that we get into a situation where there is a interdisciplinary nature and people get trained on that. And some of this we are seeing, like for example, Pune University, VZTI, they have shown lot of actually interest in setting up center of excellences so that the students get opportunity to learn from industry and interact with industry leaders. But obviously, I think for any change, it would take time. So we are trying to work with the Skill Development Council of India. We are trying to work with various academic institutions. But one thing which now we have done it is as on behalf of India Energy Storage Alliance, because in last 5 years we have done number of training sessions and webinars for our members. So we are now putting all that knowledge base into a online learning platform and making it available to even students or individual professional members, so that they can actually learn from the industry, learn from some of the best academic experts from around the world, and help develop these skills. But this is the area where there is a huge opportunity, and again, I'm looking forward to possible partnership with IT, because you have a very strong network amongst existing academic network. We are similarly talking to SAE India for doing partnership on the automotive side. We already have started doing joint training sessions with ARAI Academy, the Automotive Research Institute of India. They have a separate training arm. So we have already done 4 training programs with them. So I think there is a lot more which needs to be done in this area. And in fact, how fast we can do the skill development, that will determine actually success of some of the companies, because the growth which is expected is sort of beyond exponential. It is almost like a vertical part of the hockey stick curve. Just to tell you right now, and this is not just in India. In fact, we are going to face competition from many international countries, where the kind of talent in this area will be sought after anywhere in the world. So it is not just about sort of competing for this talent in India. Around the world right now, the lithium-ion cell manufacturing capacity is somewhere around 300 gigawatt hour annual capacity. It is expected that by 2025 this would go up to 1500 gigawatt hour. And this is, I'm not talking about only requirement for skills in the manufacturing sector, because a lot of this manufacturing is automated. So you can do the scale up the manufacturing. But once all these batteries are manufactured, ultimately they have to get converted into the systems, they have to get installed on the field, they have to be maintained, they have to be controlled. So there are going to be so many tremendous opportunities going to come up in this area, where I think people who are passionate about this area and who are can develop these right skills in next 2 or 3 years, this could be a great career opportunity. In fact, a lot of times we do even meet people who are like 30, 40 years in the industry. They are coming to us and saying like, oh, our companies are not yet seeing the vision and they don't want to work on this area. But I'm convinced that next 10 years or next 20 years, there is going to be tremendous opportunity for this. So this is my last opportunity. So what can I do to get involved in the industry? So we are trying to sort of figure out how we as a IESA, as a community, can help wider skill development in this area.
Okay, so traditionally, by virtue of the petroleum products what we use, we have a petroleum university, right? Now I see battery or storage or whatever technology we're going to use, since the adoption is going to be so huge.
Yes.
Don't you think, which ministry this subject falls under? Is it Ministry of Power? Huh?
So that's a very interesting question. So there are actually almost around 8 ministries where you have to deal with when you are talking about this. So there is Ministry of Power. So if you are talking about grid electrification or something on the grid side, there is Ministry of Power. If you are talking about renewable energy, there is a Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. If you are talking about the power electronics and electronics component, then there is a METI. If you are talking about automotive manufacturing, there is a Department of Heavy Industries. There is a Department of Science and Technology. There is a Department of Road Transport, which is going to determine some of the standards and other aspects. If you're talking about imports or exports, there is a DIPP. So yeah, there are many ministries there. But you also raised a question about petroleum university. In fact, this is the area where actually India had the foresight, where actually India is one of the only countries where we already have a Central Electrochemical Research Institute, SECRI, at Karaikudi and Chennai. So this was something set up back in 1952 under the CSIR, and in fact, many of the top researchers around the world of Indian origin have actually got their fundamental training at SECRI. So, and then now we have actually many other universities and institutions, including IIT Bombay, IIT Roorkee, IIT Kharagpur, IIT Chennai, IISc. So, lot of these universities, which are very strong technically, have a very strong research program in this area. I think there is a tremendous opportunity in this area, and there is a huge investment happening from government in scaling up, upgrading these universities. In fact, we are about to sign a MOU with SECRI, where we are trying to figure out how we can help some of these national institutes for getting hundreds of crore of funding from government to set up state-of-the-art facilities, how that can be made available to industry, and how we can encourage industry academic collaborations in the coming year.
Sure. So, very important point on sustainability. Huge batteries will be used on the grid and on the EV. There is a definite time for it. It has to go for recycle. So, what are the, if not managed properly, there could be potential impacts on the environment, right? So, I was very happy to hear from you that most of the material can be recycled, the core material. But still, is there a thought process around making this as a regulation of end of life of this electrochemical batteries?
Yes.
And there has to be a proper enforcement brought in. Otherwise, we see waste the way it has been managed. If
Yes.
such electrochemicals are being managed in a very irresponsible way, it might turn out to be more problems.
Yes.
So, what's your thought
Yes.
process on that?
No, so that is, you are absolutely right, and that's area where Ministry of Environment and Forestry, so MOEF, and I forgot to take their name in the earlier list of ministries, but good that you asked the question. So they have already come up with actually the 2020 battery handling rule guidelines, and we on behalf of industry have already given our recommendations to them. For these type of rules are coming up, but traditionally the challenge has been more on the enforcement side. So in fact, there are agencies like Indian Lead Acid Battery Association and others have done tremendous work on coming up with actually the battery handling rules even for lead acid industry. And in India, it's not that lead acid batteries are not getting recycled. The problem has been how they are getting recycled and if there is the right environmental control which is put in there. I've had discussion with some of the top business leaders from the lead acid battery industry, and they have said that they were themselves very happy to actually invest into recycling facility and set those up. But the way in India, the fragmented recycling industry is there at every local level, and the way they don't have to follow the environmental rules and regulations, it becomes very difficult for large companies to compete with them if they have to follow all the rules and then others are not going to follow it. So that's something where we definitely need to create more awareness, and ultimately even consumers have the responsibility, because rather than just giving it to anyone and just taking few rupees extra for your scrap, if you can make sure that you deliver those batteries at a authorized dealers or something, and then make sure that they are getting into proper recycling, then that will make a big difference. In fact, right now we are talking to five companies who are ready to set up recycling facilities in India. Their only concern is about this complete value chain and the supply chain for collecting the old batteries. So we are trying to talk to some of the large retail chains and others and try to figure out if we can establish a easy to use recycling process. And we are in fact going to host a dedicated roundtable on 1st October to try to brainstorm some of these areas. So again, if there is anyone who is interested in working on recycling or have any great ideas which should be implemented, then please do join us, and let's work on it, because the scale at which now these batteries are going to come up is completely unprecedented. We are talking about not just 10x but possibly 100x increase in the quantity of the batteries which will get generated. One good part is, as compared to the traditional batteries where you see the dry cell batteries or even nickel metal hydride or other batteries, where the life is typically considered as maybe few months to few years at max, you are talking about most of these advanced batteries, they will have a life of minimum 5 years, but possibly even 10 or 15 years. So we do have a time where we can set this up, but now is a time where we need to make sure that in next or 2 years, 2-3 years, this infrastructure gets set up. And the problem right now is happening not for these grid batteries, but actually the bigger problem is more on the consumer electronic side, because the old cell phones, the laptop batteries, and the ones which are right now getting thrown into the garbage. I think all the electric vehicle batteries, or when you're talking about these grid scale batteries, I think recycling of those will be relatively easier, because typically whoever is a off taker, they can just put in a contract, one small clause in a your contract saying that at end of the life, the EPC company or someone has a responsibility for disposing it carefully, and that takes care of that problem. But we need to also make sure that all these batteries which are being used in consumer electronics and other things, they are also collected properly and recycled well.
I take your point, Dr. Rahul, but unless there is a commercial value attached to it, so that you get that, if you properly manage, you get that last part of it.
Yes,
For
yes,
example, for a switchgear industry, gas insulated switchgears,
yeah,
insulation, SF6 is one of the insulation material used, and
yes,
everybody knows SF6 is a, it's polluting, and
yes,
it's not good for the ozone. So countries like Australia have imposed something called as gas tax.
yeah,
So you sell a switchgear, depending upon the quantum of gas which is inside, there's a tax what you pay. And when you close that particular after the end of life, if you make sure that the same amount of gas is retrieved back, you get that money back.
sure,
Something like that, unless there is a commercial value chain associated to it,
yes,
the enforcement may not happen.
sure,
With just a cost there,
sure.
you know. So
So
that's
one aspect, yeah. So one aspect in which this may get addressed is that, as I mentioned in my presentation, that Niti Aayog has this ambitious program for getting 50 gigawatt hour of cell manufacturing, where the companies who manufacture these cells in India will get up to $30 per kilowatt hour cash incentive, and that is linked to the amount of value capture which is happening in India. So if you are importing all the raw materials from outside, then straight away you lose 30 to 40% of that incentive money. Whereas if you use the recycled material from India, that will be considered as a domestic value addition. So there are certain these type of processes which are being set up, which should create a right incentive structure for people to do that. Particularly actually for the consumer electronics batteries, in fact they are quite valuable. If there is anyone who is on the call who is throwing their old batteries and other thing, actually you can get paid for those batteries, because most of these batteries use a significant amount of cobalt, which has a very good value. So if there is someone who is not paying you for those batteries, then probably you can look for right recyclers, where actually you can get paid for these consumer electronic batteries. In fact, there are a number of companies who are into refurbishing, where people are finding, say, take up a 6 cell or 9 cell old laptop battery, dismantle it, try to do the testing of the cells, and use some of the cells which are still good for like small scale applications like a LED light, or having these small fans being powered by lithium-ion batteries. So there is also a strong reuse industry which is coming up. Although right now it is completely fragmented and just local level, but there is a lot of discussion about, especially for the automotive batteries, second life application, where these batteries will be collected, they will be explored if they are still possible to be used for second life. So those things are happening right now.
we have a battery in the vehicle which we are driving, which is big size. Just not for your auxiliary system. Okay, it's a quite a big size and high density battery, because we wanted to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. And there are in the substations henceforth you go, you will have a huge. There is to be an auxiliary power supply battery room only for protecting the secondary protections and the metering.
Yes.
Now you have primary battery system in the in the substations. So what's the safety related issues which are getting sorted out? The fire, the leak and stuff like that. What is the advancement happening in that?
Sure. So this is again a very, very important issue. So thank you for bringing it up, because inherently the material which goes into batteries, it is flammable, especially with the lithium-ion batteries, or even lead-acid batteries do catch fire. When it is all about how do you manage that, right? So for example, every time you are driving any vehicle, the fuel which is there in it, it is combustible. In fact, you are running the vehicle because the fuel is being burned in a controlled fashion, and then you are driving that energy from that combustion of that fuel. So same thing happens with batteries. As we are going for higher and higher energy density, there is a lot of energy which is packed in a small volume. So if you don't control it properly, there is a risk of fire, there is a risk of safety. But there is a good part is that this is not a new issue. This is something which people had known since 1970s or 1980s, and there are a lot of ways in which you can control it. That's why you don't keep on hearing so many issues about fires. You just hear once in a while a Samsung phone catching fire or something, which is more of a manufacturing defect, not by default or randomly some battery will catch fire. But then the one issue which I think we are trying to educate stakeholders in India is at a system integration level, because right now in India we have a tendency, and especially in solar, this has happened where many companies are coming up and they just think that okay, I can buy solar panels, I can buy an inverter, I can just have an electrician put it together and my system is working. Especially when it comes to the batteries, the kind of risk are more. So there are proper standards like a UL standards or IC standards which have come up. So you need to make sure that these standards are followed, and these standards are not just at a cell level. There are separate standards for safety of the entire system. So all those standards needs to be followed. But if that happens, then I'm pretty sure we can have a safe systems. But if it is not followed, even in places like say Korea or US, we have had these large megawatt scale systems catching fire. In fact, in Korea, they had almost 35 megawatt scale systems catching fire within 1 year of installation in 2018, and that in fact set back the industry. Similarly, from Japan, there was a company which was manufacturing sodium sulfur batteries, and that was seen as one of the most promising battery chemistries back in 2006 2010 timeline, before actually lithium ion batteries were started getting considered. But they deployed almost around 1,000 megawatt hour of batteries, and then 4 or 5 of their systems caught fire, and they had to almost like shut down entire operating fleet and wait for 2 years before they could sell again. And that ended up almost like killing most of their opportunities going forward. And in the meantime, lithium ion batteries came up. So this is something which you need to be very careful about. So safety is perhaps the only risk factor we see which could derail the pace at which this growth is happening. But when it comes to especially on the EV side, there are robust existing standards where any battery which before it gets into a automotive vehicle, that has to pass certain regulations and testing. Now same thing, we need to make sure that it also gets implemented in two-wheelers, in three-wheelers, and we don't compromise safety just for getting cheaper vehicles.
Absolutely. Safety is very important, and that will be one of the very, very important deciding factors. So let's start taking questions
Sure.
from our participants. One very interesting question, which says from Mr. Umesh MV, Associate Professor from Kumaraguru College of Technology. He asks, goose neck or giraffe neck with respect to energy usage by people for EV vehicle in future during specific hours. Then how do we tackle this problem, or any solution in pipeline to control the load on the grid or a smart grid? That's the
Sure.
question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there are easy solutions, right? So ultimately, what we see in India is that people do follow economic signal very carefully. So as long as you don't sort of get into this tariff that oh, anytime you charge an electric vehicle, you get 4 rupee tariff. If you just say that the special EV tariff is only available when there is excess power on the grid or there is low load on the grid, I'm pretty sure people will find out a way in which they change their driving patterns around it. You need to make sure that there is a charging infrastructure available when most of these vehicles will get parked. So, for example, during the day, most of the office complexes, there are already building standards which are being proposed, where for commercial facilities now electric vehicle charging infrastructure is becoming mandatory. It is not optional. So these are things when you make sure that this charging is available easily when these vehicles will be available during the day, then people don't have to come back in the home in the evening and then connect it for charging or wait for in the morning for charging. So those things can be done. And the other part is very simple. It is even if you connect a vehicle for charging, you can easily do electronically control when it is charged. It's not that as soon as you connect the vehicle, it needs to be charged. There could be simple timer control or others which can make sure that you only charge when the electricity is available cheap, or you can go one level deeper, as Anil mentioned in his one of the earlier comments about role of digital and role of the bidirectional communication, where you can only charge when that system is available, and then you can solve this problem. So the way we see it is there is actually more and more opportunity for this being a solution. We just keep on the point about the camel becoming a giraffe, just to highlight that if we don't pay attention to it and if we just go after cheaper systems, non-controllable systems, as well as just go arbitrarily tariff structures just to promote electric vehicles without considering these factors, then you would create a nightmare for the utilities or the grid.
Very rightly said, Dr. Rahul. So there's a suggestion and a question coming. Will it be easy if the manufacturer takes the complete responsibility of managing the battery life cycle rather than through a third party? For example, they can buy the used batteries, recycle, reuse, and dispose. That's one of the suggestions.
Sure. So it can be done. I'm not sure if that is the most efficient one. I think from the regulator point of view, it may be the easiest one that they do assign, and in Europe they do take this approach where the manufacturer has the responsibility for ultimate making sure that the product can be disassembled easily and it is getting recycled properly. But ultimately, there are different players in the ecosystem who would be taking care of this. So as long as you just make sure that the rules and regulations are enforced properly, we think we don't need to just ask for manufacturers to collect everything, because ultimately most of the manufacturers may not have the recycling facilities themselves, so they anyway have to give it to someone else. But as long as it is there where we know that the manufacturers, and first of all, for all this to happen, we need to get a domestic manufacturing at cell level. If we don't have it, then there is going to be less incentive for setting up this entire recycling and other ecosystem. So it is very important that the first step is we need to sort of get away from our traditional mindset where we want to wait too long before considering manufacturing, because we have missed semiconductor, solar manufacturing, cell phone manufacturing, almost every major industry where India is now a top 3 consumer. Somehow the policymakers or the industry leaders never had a conviction that India is going to become a big market in this, and we never focused on manufacturing. Now this is a maybe 5th time or 6th time it is happening. So this time definitely we need to make sure that we as a country do not lose this opportunity and we do become a global hub for manufacturing. And if that happens with the kind of incentive structure which is laid out under the NITI Aayog program, I'm pretty sure that there will be enough incentive for the recycling facility operators to make sure that they do get all these raw materials, and then those backward linkages can take place separately, and that's where groups like India Energy Storage Alliance can play a role, because we are working across the entire value chain and we are trying to help these companies make this partnership. So rather than just making a scapegoat out of one company and saying that you need to take care of everything, because if you scare a company, then probably they will just say, okay, instead of setting up manufacturing in India, I will set it up in Vietnam or some other country where it is less tedious. So India has, I think, tried very hard in last 4 years to climb up the ease of doing business. So we should be just a little bit attentive to that as well.
Thanks, Dr. Rahul. There's one it's a question saying that 175 gigawatt by 2022 is okay, but 450 gigawatt by 2030, is there an official document to justify this statement? So that's the question. So my answer is I have not seen an official document, but I've seen a lot of talk around it. Your view on this, Doctor?
Yeah, so again, even the 175 gigawatt, there was no study which was done which came up and picked up that number as a number, right? It was a number which was decided by policymakers and probably the Prime Minister in some strategy meeting, and they set that as a vision. And now, actually, again, I just remember, because when that 100 gigawatt target was set up in 2014, actually there was a lot of debate that previous government had set up a target of 20 gigawatt by 2022, and there was no one believed that India can actually get to 20 gigawatt. People were saying, oh, it would be great if India gets to 10 gigawatt, because traditionally that was a track record of planning commission, that whatever target you set for next 5 years, India typically achieves 50% of that. So there was sort of this joke in the policy circle that, okay, we are setting 20 gigawatt target, so we should be happy if we get to 10 gigawatt. But after Modi ji came into the power and he changed the game, again, everyone felt that this was like a completely ridiculous and it just cannot be done. But now we are in a very good situation, except for some of these economic issues or some of the local state level issues like what has happened in Andhra Pradesh, where the government has suddenly gone back on PPAs and other things, which is dampening the investor interest. We would have easily met the target. Even right now, the way we see it is now it is no longer because government wants this target to be made. Now solar has become the cheapest energy available. So there is a inherent demand for this cheap energy. So now it is no longer because just government wants this to happen and meet certain number. So I think yes, we will definitely meet 175 gigawatt target. It may be 1 or 2 year later than maybe 2022, but at the same time, you have just seen probably the announcement yesterday that in Gujarat they are looking at setting a single hybrid park of 45 gigawatt by 2022. So if some of these type of announcements actually end up resulting in these projects, then we could even exceed actually the 175 gigawatt. At least that's what is the official statement from Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. And I don't want to go against government and claim that they cannot do it. So if they stay focused, they could do it. Technically, I don't think there is a much restriction, except that to achieve to that number, they also need to start now focusing on hybrid system, including storage. And the great news is that this is already happening. Solar Energy Corporation of India, and as a full disclosure, they are also part of the India Energy Storage Alliance, and we work closely with them. Last 5 years, they have done tremendous work in understanding the business case for energy storage. They have started coming up with different tenders for distributed systems, for large centralized system, and the price points which they are discovering is very, very encouraging. So we think coupled with storage, these numbers can be achieved. The only question would be that would they now start displacing some of the coal and other technologies in a much bigger way, because there is a lot of investment still planned on some of these thermal assets where people are just not taking renewables seriously. But especially when you add storage to the renewables and renewable plus hybrid, I think that is becoming an unbeatable combination now. And this is happening not just in India, but everywhere around the world. Many of the even traditional utilities who are dominant on coal plants have changed their complete roadmap for next 10 years, and they are scrapping up their plan for building new coal plants and moving for such hybrid systems with 4 to 6 hours of storage. And that's a complete game changer. So if we do that, I think getting to 450 gigawatt is not impossible. It may be again improbable, but not impossible. And the key part would be how does the rest of the economy does. The major question I have is, are we going to have sufficient load to absorb all this energy? Because to get 450 gigawatt renewables, probably the India's grid needs to get to at least 600 or 700 gigawatt in terms of the peak load, and that is again not very difficult. If you think of US or China, so US has a population of 350 million, and US grid has a peak load of more than 1000 gigawatt. So in India, when we keep on talking about, oh, India doesn't have a load, India cannot grow, I think somewhere we need to just realize that we are losing lot of economic development opportunity because we are not making electricity available to people. And once we start changing it, and once you start looking at electricity not as a luxury but as a tool for economic development, actually there could be much more appetite. Again, I don't say that India needs to get to the level of US, but with a 4 times population, we can easily get to the kind of electricity generation which is required there. And if we can do it in a more sustainable way, which is a vision set by Prime Minister, then I think that is a great vision for India. We definitely don't want to live in a situation where every time we have to go out, we have to wear mask, not for corona, but for air pollution. So that's an area where I think we need to, and again, right now, just request to everyone, if you are going outside, please wear mask right now because of the corona and COVID situation. But otherwise, I hope that beyond the COVID situation, we can get back to a situation where we are working on a much cleaner transportation system. We are working on a much greener electric grid, where some of the traditional air pollution issues and other thing we don't have to worry about as much.
No, so very clear, very, very clear. Tremendous advantages of going this way. More electric is the way. Storage is unavoidable and indispensable, if I can use the word. But better management is the key towards harnessing the total potential of the storage. So, and definitely I'm very, very confident on Government of India and the progress what we have seen in the last 5 years. It is really cruising towards its ambition. Of course, there could be a lot of constraints which has to be sorted out along the way.
We have still some time. We can take a couple of them if we can do it quickly. Yogesh Pai asks us that can you provide some perspective on the V2G and the G2V technologies, the vehicle to grid and grid to vehicle, and and if it would get a wider adoption in the near future?
Sure. Technically, it can very well be. I don't think there is any technical restriction for V2G. One of the issues earlier was actually more about the type of batteries which are being used in the electric vehicles. Because of the cost constraint, most of the auto manufacturers were focusing on putting in batteries in electric vehicles which were lasting only 700 or 1000 cycles. So in which case you want to preserve those batteries for the primary driving ability. But now we are getting to a stage where we are getting these batteries which can last 5000, 7000, 10,000 cycles. So having such dual usage for both transportation as well as for grid is very much possible right now. Also, technically, the cost of communication controls, and again, Anil is an expert in this area, there has been so much exponential improvement which has happened that now some of the traditional cost barrier where people would say, oh, why would I control a one individual vehicle? Now people are talking about actually controlling like an individual charging of a laptop and try to aggregate those laptops, that type of thing. So I think it is very much possible. The only barrier is now on the regulatory side. The regulators in India needs to actually show little bit faith and try to create some of these policies. And some of these policies don't require to be made just for vehicle to grid. As long as they just allow something like a demand response program and allow not just coal plants but also allow some of these new technologies, batteries either on the grid or on the behind the meter or as part of the electric vehicles to provide grid balancing services and then get compensated. So there is nothing else required. Actually, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission has been discussing this for last 5 years. Last two chairmen have a document ready in front of them. If they decide to sign it, tomorrow we can start actually introducing these services. And there are companies like Schneider and many other countries are actually ready. They have the solutions. They are deploying these solutions everywhere in the world. There are companies like us who are operating these fleets right now around the world, and we are in India. So yes, V2G can become a good solution. It requires both work on the automotive side in terms of making sure the right batteries are there and then right communication infrastructure is in place. And the last but most important piece is the regulatory environment where you incentivize people to do it. People are not going to do it just as a charity to electric grid. They will do it if they get some value in return.
True, true. Thank you. We can take three more questions if we can, have them answered within a minute. So I'll request you also to store some energy for these. They're coming up now. So one is
I want
Yes,
half a
Anil.
minute. I wanted people to encourage to join Energy Group of IT.
Yeah.
There's a lot of innovation around the corner, and we need hands, minds to join this and bring it up. And there's a lot of standardization. As I unearthed, as we discovered from the discussions and many more, there's a lot of work to be done from the think tank, and a lot of knowledge needs to come in. Simple. What is the protocol of communication between the vehicle and the grid? Is there a standard? So there's a lot of work to be done. How are you going to manage so many distributed energy resources across? What is the communication protocol? Okay. How are you going to model the business model in technical sense? So a lot of questions needs to be answered, and we want best of the best minds to come and join us. So I encourage, please come and join Energy Group. We are very, very happy, and we would want to collaborate more and more with you. Please reach out to me or Suman. We are very happy to take it forward.
Yeah,
I will volunteer and I will definitely join
Please,
right now. Not
we have somebody from Yamuna, BSES Yamuna Power, who has asked us, Shekhar Saklani, that any possibilities for a DISCOM for getting the BESS installed at their grids at the cost of the installer and profit sharing mechanism in terms of load managed during peak hours.
So it is possible to some extent, but I think the DISCOM just need to now wake up and need to realize that they cannot just keep on getting all these sort of advanced technologies for free at a cost of installer. This is actually one area where I am actually not very happy with Indian DISCOMs. This is an area where probably Anil may have suffered much more on this area than me, but I think there is just this tendency where I think Discom just wants to try out things at the cost of equipment companies or service companies, and then just claim that they are doing something without looking into business case. What I would actually suggest is that the Discoms, because they understand their distribution systems very well, they need to work with these companies to identify locations where it makes a solid business case for adding it, and then go to regulators, make sure that the projects are funded, because these are purely viable, economically commercial projects which are happening at gigawatt hour scales around the world. And unfortunately, in India, we are into this situation where the Discoms try to hold all the information within themselves and not share any information, and then still want someone to just come in and do a demonstration project for sake of doing demonstration. Right now, most of the serious players around the world are no longer interested in doing a demonstration project in India. They have gigawatt scale projects which are a purely commercially operational projects. So if distribution companies want to do real projects, if they are ready to share information, who finances the project, how does it done, that all can be worked out. But it cannot be where, oh, okay, I'm a utility, I just want someone to come in and put this money. And in fact, if you join us on 22nd September, you'll have actually here, it's, don't take my word for it, you'll hear at least from 40 plus top people who have done it around the world. Just take example of Australia, where they had this grid problem in back in 2017, where they had a grid failure, and they just started talking about what is the solution. Elon Musk offered batteries, and within 6 months they did complete system studies as well as did a big RFP where 120 megawatt hour of storage project got commissioned in less than 100 days. In fact, Elon Musk offered that he will give the project free if Tesla cannot deliver the project in 100 days. Unfortunately, in India, we have the situation where Discoms are for 7 or 8 years just discussing issues. Even cases like Andaman Nicobar, where the cost of electricity is almost 28, 29 rupees with diesel, not accounting for cost of transportation of diesel. We have just done 2 projects in last 8 years, and that too for a small 30-minute project, where we should have been doing like 4 hour, 6 hour, 8 hour projects in Andaman Nicobar and completely get rid of diesel consumption for Andaman Nicobar. So this is the area where I would like to put ball back in the court of Discoms and say that don't expect freebies. Most of the serious players are no longer interested in this. But if you want to work as a partners, then yes, as a IESA, actually we are working with some of the Discoms to try to help them identify such projects and get this built. So I'm very optimistic on that side.
Thank you. I think that was really well versed and a bold answer, Dr. Rahul. Now we've got 2 more that we can quickly take. One is coming from one of our Facebook Live viewers. Okay, so this session is also going live on Facebook.
Okay, okay.
So Abhishek from Facebook Live wanted to ask, how do we promote smaller scale entrepreneurs to enter into this energy and recycling business? But wouldn't giving all the recycling control to the larger companies kill the small business based on the recycling polymers and the lead components? That is this question.
Sure. So I think right now there are good opportunities because again there is no major. Although Tata Chemicals is one large company who has announced that they are going to get into this ecosystem, but ultimately all these batteries and everything is very heavy batteries, right? So just having like a one centralized recycling plant in India is most likely not going to work. There could be few such large centralized plants, but still there could be actually other opportunities in the ecosystem. So what I would encourage any young entrepreneur is that do your homework, because a lot of times what we see is like there are people who are very passionate, who have some ideas, but they just jump into it without actually doing a proper due diligence and understanding the pros and cons of it. So talk to other industry experts, get involved with groups like IT or IESA and others, so that you can understand actually what is the pain point for the your potential partners, your potential investors, what is the performance criteria, what you have to meet so that you can raise the capital to get to the next level. And if you can do this, I'm actually super excited. In fact, I have decided that next 5 years I'm going to dedicate 25% of my time to work with startups, especially once we launch this virtual accelerator, which will start operating from January. Personally, I'm very much excited about the startup ecosystem. We already have worked in US with 10 plus early stage startups in last 15 years who between them have gone ahead and raised more than $1 billion, and they are some of the best known companies right now in the Western world. So I would love to replicate that type of a success in India. And already, as I mentioned in my slide, we have some of the most promising startups already as part of the ISA network, like Ether, Ampere, Bounce, and others. So I'm very excited. And again, please reach out to me, sir, one on one. I'll be happy to see how we can help you
Brilliant.
in the
Yeah,
entrepreneur
yeah,
journey.
definitely. And the last one that we can take is now. Before I take the question, I would want to tell all the viewers that we will help you reach out to Dr. Rahul, because some of them wanted to reach out to you, and also we'll help you reach out to our panel members from the Energy Working Group, so that if you have any queries or anything that you want some advice and advisory on, you can always reach out to these experts for the same. The session is also being recorded, so we will also share the recording of the session with all of you. Uh, Now, taking the last one for this session, Dr. Rahul and Anil, this comes from one of our working group members, Dr. Kumudini Ravindra. She's asked, what are the implications of maturity of microgrids and how storage can play a role in it?
Okay. Yeah, that's again something which is very close to our heart. Microgrids is an area where we do a lot of work internationally as well as in India. Under ISA umbrella, we have launched the initiative called Microgrid Initiative for Campus and Rural Opportunities, where we have been doing a lot of work in this, and we think there are opportunities both on energy access side as well as on campus microgrid side. In fact, Anil mentioned during the remarks that 10 years back, when first time when we met, we were actually working on a concept of a smart SEZ in Maharashtra, where we were trying to introduce some innovative business models, such as having power zones with a 99.9999 reliability, so that individual companies do not have to keep on investing in diesel generators, UPS systems, and others, and try to actually take care of that as a common infrastructure. So I think there is a tremendous opportunity for this. And then these microgrids as a resource, which are grid interconnected microgrids, there could be actually great opportunities. So campus microgrids, especially if you have locations like SEZs or any licensees who are flexibility, where they can invest in the capital and then recover it by certain innovative rate structures, then these type of campus microgrids can grow. On the other hand side, officially in India, now we are completely grid connected. So number of people do ask us, why do you still talk about microgrids for energy access? So now what I would like to say is that yes, there is now majority of the people in India now do have access to grid in terms of the basic lighting, maybe television or fan kind of a thing, but still the reliability is not that great. And more than that, the issue what we are facing is seeing on the remote areas is that the kind of grid which is right now laid out is only basic minimum single phase microgrid or single phase grid connections, which is not sufficient for running any productive load. So if you are looking at doing some agro processing, you are looking at someone doing some welding or some kind of a other activity which requires a three-phase connectivity. Right now, most of these remote areas actually do not have this. So in fact, under the micro initiative, I have a colleague, Nitin Akhade, who is leading this area for us. We are actually picking up Jharkhand as one of the first pilot areas where we are looking at doing some of these production linked or economy linked microgrids to try to develop a sustainable economic business model. So these microgrids are not for proving if solar works or if hydro works or wind works. These microgrids are, we are working on the concept purely from looking at what type of a energy supply would be required for starting some economically productive business in that area, and then how do we meet it either with grid or with if grid is not sufficient, then microgrid, and not just assume that okay, we can wait for another 10 years for these regions to get developed, because if we do that, we are losing lot of productivity in these remote areas. So that's one area where we are working, and again, if you are working in this area, we would love to invite you to partner in the micro initiative with ISA.
Just one half a second. Microgrid,
Yes.
as you say, have another connotation to microgrid. A large campus itself is a microgrid, which has rooftop solar. There are so much connectable loads and controllable loads. So there's building automation system, there is power automation system. If you bring all the systems together, there's a perfect synergy to operate the microgrid. Even in case of islanding, a little bit of degradation more, you can run your operations. So I think microgrid goes well beyond the communities and inside a CIB, a commercial industrial building, and an electro-intensive facility also. So that's my
Yes. So we're very optimistic with actually the carriage and content separation. Unfortunately, the power minister has just announced that that is dead. So we need to now again go back to the drawing board and figure out under what regulatory framework this can happen. Because we as a customized energy solutions actually had worked with almost around 35 plus ACZ owners and others to try to actually encourage them to consider this. And especially now with commercial tariffs in number of states reaching around 12 rupees plus, actually solar plus storage, people can actually get it for around 5 or 6 rupees. So it is actually economically viable. So it is no longer just that for reliability you have to pay premium, but actually if you can have good campus microgrids, then you can actually get away from the distribution companies and actually save as much as possibly half the electricity tariff what you are paying as a commercial customer.
so it promotes energy efficiency. So
Yes.
that's a very important point. Okay, I think we are 10 minutes over, Suman. I think we have a lot of.
Yes, we have stretched a little bit over time, but I think it was much needed because
Yeah.
the kind of
So,
question.
Suman, I think I just noticed there was one question about fuel cells. So maybe if it is okay, I'll just answer it quickly in 1 minute.
Yes, please.
Can you find that question? I forget. I remember seeing something
Just
about
a
fuel
minute.
cells.
Just a minute.
Okay, yeah.
Uh,
What is the future of fuel cell as a storage in power generation and e-locomotive? So that's again a very interesting question. So I have been looking into fuel cells for now more than probably 20 years. And in fact, around 10 years back, probably I had wrongly concluded that there is not much future for fuel cell and only electrochemical technologies will dominate and time for fuel cells had gone. But actually now there is a greater emergence coming in for especially green hydrogen economy, where it is no longer just about electricity, but there is a lot of concerted efforts happening about how you can look into the hydrogen ecosystem as part of a complete greener industry and others. So people are looking at how do you improve carbon intensity of steel manufacturing or some other industrial processes using green hydrogen. And this is the area where I think hydrogen has a great opportunity. And again, I don't have much time to explain, but in
Thank you. We have Dr. Ravindra with us. She had raised a hand. She's part of the energy working group. Yes, Dr. Kumudini, you want to say something before we
Uh,
close the session?
One thing is, because we were also having a conversation about microgrids, just wanted to quickly add, rather than limiting ourselves to looking at just energy access or campus driven systems, one of the challenges that you were mentioning is handling thousands or millions of these dispersed and distributed energy systems. Microgrid actually offers a perfect platform for the control and for the demand response itself. So creating a federation of microgrids would probably be the grid of the future, right? So actually, I think it is important for us to start thinking on those lines and also start looking at business plans and business opportunities and value propositions in that direction as well.
sure. Yes.
And that's when it would be seamless,
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I would have, any which ways, urged you to come, Dr. Kumudini,
Thank you.
because we wanted to thank, Anil, Dr. Rahul, you, and all the other panel members of the working group in energy, Mr. Vikrant Sankhe from Siemens, Mr. Ajit Tulo from Pentair. You guys have all helped us put together this wonderful session today. And especially thanks to Dr. Rahul, to get find the time and the put together this kind of content and being able to be so direct and informative. I think, Anil, I would pass this over to you for you to summarize and close the session. We have a minute.
Thank you so much. So we touched on all the aspects, present, past, and the very important future part of the storage. And also we touched about microgrid. Thanks, Dr. Ravindra Kumudini and Dr. Rahul. It was a fantastic session. I learned a lot. Let me be very honest. I learned a lot, and it creates a lot of hope for the electric economy or the electric new world of electricity, as we called as. So thank you very much, and I thank all the participants who joined this. And I again urge, please become part of IET and IES. There's a lot to be done in this space. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Anil and Suman. And again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share these views. As I mentioned again, my association with IT goes really long, and yeah, I look forward to actually getting more involved with IT and also exploring certain joint activities between IT and IESA so that we can take it beyond the discussion and make some good case studies and examples out of India.
True.
Thank you.